I know. I don't have much time left. I have one last wish. I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. But I could never have anticipated that his next words would leave me utterly stunned. I want to be close to a woman. His voice cracked and his face flushed bright red. One last time, before I go. The room seemed to freeze. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. My ears buzzed, my mind went blank. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. It couldn't be true. My grandfather, the gentle, dignified man I had always admired and respected, could say something like that? I know. I don't have much time left. I have one last wish. I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. But I could never have anticipated that his next words would leave me utterly stunned. I want to be close to a woman. His voice cracked and his face flushed bright red. One last time, before I go. The room seemed to freeze. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. My ears buzzed, my mind went blank. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. It couldn't be true. My grandfather, the gentle, dignified man I had always admired and respected, could say something like that? America in the early 21st century, a land of towering skyscrapers proudly rising amidst bustling cities. The fast-paced rhythm of life swept me into the whirlwind of work and daily concerns. Yet, in rare moments, I found tranquility in quiet little corners of the city where time seemed to flow more slowly. It was in such places that I grew up, and where my grandfather, Joseph, spent the final days of his life. My grandfather's house, a peaceful retreat in a quiet suburb, stood far from the city's noise. It was an old two-story wooden home with a broad porch and a lush green garden surrounding it. Time had left a solemn patina on the house, yet it retained its charm, exuding a sense of coziness and nostalgia. Inside, everything seemed frozen in time from when my grandmother was still alive, family photos adorning the walls, old books lining the shelves, and the armchair where my grandparents often sat together, reading. Every corner spoke of an era long gone, a time of happiness and peace. But now, that peace had been shattered by the shadows of illness and solitude. Since my grandmother passed away 10 years ago, Joseph had lived alone in that house, keeping company only with his memories. Old age and sickness had robbed him of his strength, turning him into a shadow of his former self. I often wondered if there was anything I could do to make up for the years he had spent alone, surrounded by the silence of those four walls. That autumn, it felt as though the entire world carried an indescribable sadness. The first cold winds of the season swept through the towering trees, scattering golden leaves across the road leading to my grandfather's home. I drove along that path, feeling the weight of worry pressing against each breath. Grandfather Joseph, the man I cherished most, was no longer the same. His calls had become infrequent, his voice frail, like a small flame fighting against a strong wind. I knew time was no longer on his side. When I stepped into the old house, a chill enveloped me, not from the weather, but from the silence. The house remained familiar, warm and rustic, yet missing something intangible. Perhaps it was the presence of my grandmother, who had left us 10 years earlier. The space, though peaceful, carried a quiet sorrow, as if it too understood the fragility of time. Grandfather sat in his armchair by the window, the golden rays of the setting sun highlighting the deep lines etched on his gaunt face. His eyes, once bright and full of life, now seemed clouded, gazing at a distance I could not fathom. In that moment, my heart clenched tightly. "Grandpa," I called softly, my voice caught in the swell of emotion. He turned his head slowly, a faint, weary smile spreading across his lips. "Ellie, you're here?" I sat beside him, holding his frail hands. These were the hands that had once been strong, that had carried me through my childhood filled with laughter and joy. Now, they were cold, thin, and wrapped around bones that seemed so fragile. The touch brought a deep ache, as if I were holding on to the inevitability of loss itself. "How are you feeling, Grandpa?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My voice trembled, barely steady enough to mask the fear beneath. He sighed softly, his gaze still fixed on the garden where late-blooming chrysanthemums stood quietly in the fading light. "I'm all right, just a little tired." His tone shifted, quieter, as though speaking to himself. "I don't have much time left, Ellie." I froze, his words striking a chord deep within me. I wanted to say something, to refute his claim, but the truth was undeniable. It lingered in his frail breath, in the sadness etched into his eyes, the look of someone preparing for the inevitable. He turned to me then, his eyes filled with longing. "Ellie," he said hoarsely, as if gathering the last of his strength, "I have something to ask of you." I gripped his hand tighter, sensing the gravity of his words. My heart raced, bracing for whatever request he was about to make. I could never have imagined that his next words would change my life forever. "Can you do something for me?" he continued, his deep, searching gaze locked onto mine. I didn't respond with words, only nodded silently. Part of me was willing to do anything to hold on to him for even a little while longer, while another part was terrified of what he might ask. And then he spoke. His words were slow, gentle as a passing breeze, yet each syllable felt like a stone pressing down on my soul. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't fathom how he could entrust me with a responsibility so immense. In that moment, I didn't fully grasp the weight of his request. Only later, when everything unfolded, when the darkness of those decisions engulfed me, did I realize that from that day on, my life would never be the same. That was the beginning of the secret. A secret I would have to bury deep within me, even from the man I loved and the daughter I cherished. It wasn't just a burden on my conscience, but a shadow that haunted my every dream, a reminder that sometimes love comes at the price of unspeakable pain. That afternoon, the pale golden sunlight streamed through the window, casting a faint glow on my grandfather's frail face. I sat beside him, clutching his cold hand tightly. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. Suddenly, he gently squeezed my hand. His cloudy eyes met mine, no longer distant and melancholic as before. Instead, there was a strange glimmer, a pleading, desperate intensity. "Ellie," his voice rasped, strained and weak, "I need to tell you something." My heart pounded in my chest. I sensed that something was wrong. "What is it, Grandpa?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He was silent for a moment, as if mustering all his courage. Then, he spoke, each word slow and heavy. "I know. I don't have much time left. I have one last wish." I remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. But nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. I want to be close to a woman." His voice faltered, and his face flushed bright red. "One last time, before I go." The world seemed to come to a halt. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. My ears buzzed, and my mind went blank. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. It couldn't be true. My grandfather, the kind, dignified man I had always respected, could say something like that? I looked at him, searching for any hint that he might be joking. But his eyes remained fixed on mine, earnest and imploring. In them, I saw not only longing but also shame and remorse. "Grandpa," I stammered, my voice trembling. What are you saying? This can't be right." He lowered his gaze, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. I know it's wrong. But I can't hold it back anymore. Since your grandmother passed, I've felt so lonely, so empty. I just want, one more time, to feel loved." His words cut into my heart like a dagger. I felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow for him. I understood his loneliness, the longing for love he had suppressed all these years. But at the same time, I was terrified, confused, and deeply unsettled. How could I possibly accept such a request? It went against every moral value I had been taught. It was unthinkable, forbidden. But Grandpa, I struggled to speak, my voice choked with emotion. It's not right. I can't. I couldn't finish my sentence. The words caught in my throat, strangled by the turmoil raging inside me. A fierce battle unfolded in my heart. On one side was my boundless love for my grandfather, the man who had been my rock and my guide. On the other was an insurmountable wall of ethics and values I could not betray. I knew I was standing at the crossroads of the most difficult decision of my life. A decision that would change everything. My grandfather's plea echoed in my mind like a mournful bell, tearing through the quiet of my soul. One last time, before I go, those words were like sharp daggers piercing my heart, leaving an ache that reached the deepest corners of my being. I looked at him, the man I admired above all others, the man who had stepped in as my father figure when I was just a little girl. His wrinkled face, gaunt and weary, bore the weight of a desperate yearning, a profound loneliness. His clouded eyes, which once radiated warmth, now reflected a fire of longing and despair. I felt a wave of compassion for him, sympathy for the solitude and the years of isolation he had endured since my grandmother's passing. But alongside that compassion, there was fear. There was revulsion at the very thought of his request. No, this couldn't be real. I tried to push the dark thoughts invading my mind away. This was my grandfather, the person I loved and cherished most. How could I even entertain such an idea? I gathered my resolve and tried to dissuade him. I appealed to his sense of morality, societal norms, and the profound respect I had for him. "Grandpa," I said, my voice trembling, "I understand you're lonely. I understand you want to feel loved. But, what about the people around you? What about the family who loves you? How would they feel if they knew? And more importantly, have you thought about how you would feel? Would you truly find peace, knowing this was your last act?" I searched his eyes, hoping my words would reach him, that they would pull him back from the brink of this desperate request. But he simply shook his head, tears continuing to stream down his sunken cheeks. "Ellie," he said hoarsely, his voice heavy with sorrow, "you don't understand. You can't. You don't know what it feels like to be standing at death's door, to have lost everything, and to face the darkness alone. I just want a little warmth, a little love, before the end." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water, extinguishing the last glimmer of hope within me. I realized then that he was resolute, no amount of reasoning could sway him. I spiraled into a state of chaos. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. On one hand, my boundless love for my grandfather urged me to grant his final wish. On the other hand, the barriers of morality, societal norms, and my own fear of the unknown consequences held me back. I felt as though I were standing between two abysses. One was the chasm of guilt and shame, the other the chasm of regret and loss. I had no idea which path to choose. I had no idea what to do. In that moment, I felt utterly adrift. I was like a ship lost in the vast, stormy ocean, with no compass to guide me to safety. All I knew was that my life would never be the same again. The decision I was about to make would forever change me, would forever haunt me. Since that fateful afternoon, the nights stretched endlessly, as if they would never end. Sleep became a luxury I was no longer permitted to have. Instead, conflicting thoughts and relentless guilt engulfed me like stormy waves, dragging me into the deep ocean of torment. I lay in bed, tossing and turning, then lying still, my eyes fixed on the pitch-black ceiling, as if searching for an escape in the darkness. The silence was terrifying, broken only by the steady ticking of the bedside clock, each tick marking another second of this unbearable agony. The sound echoed in my ears, mingling with my heavy breathing, reminding me that time continued to pass, even though I had no idea how to move forward. Each tick of the clock mirrored the slow, heavy thuds in my chest, measured and burdened with an unnamed unease. In that endless darkness, I wondered if I could ever free myself from this tangled web of emotions, or if I was doomed to be trapped forever by my own thoughts and decisions. Images flickered unsteadily in my mind. Sometimes, it was my grandfather's gentle face, his warm smile, and the fairy tales he used to tell me when I was little. I remembered the idyllic childhood I had with my grandparents, family dinners filled with laughter, evenings gathered by the fire. Grandpa had always been my protector, my supporter, the one who believed in me unconditionally. His sacrifices for the family were boundless. After Grandma passed away, he shouldered every responsibility alone, ensuring I had everything I needed to succeed. But then, other images would rush in, tearing apart those fond memories. I saw his flushed face, his pleading eyes that afternoon, and the desperate tone of his voice as he said, "One last time, before I go." Those words felt like a curse, haunting me ceaselessly. I shut my eyes tightly, trying to banish the dreadful images. But it was futile. They clung to me, tormenting me to the core. I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for even considering granting such a request, guilt for betraying the moral principles I had always held dear, and above all, guilt for betraying myself. Amidst this chaotic storm of thoughts, the images of Mark and Sophie surfaced. Mark's smiling face, Sophie's innocent eyes, and the pure laughter of my daughter came flooding back. I remembered the joyful moments with my family, cozy evenings together, carefree picnics in the sun. A warm, happy home that I cherished deeply. The thought of losing all of that filled me with dread. I pictured Mark's devastated face if he ever discovered this secret, the disappointment in Sophie's eyes if she learned of her mother's actions. I couldn't bear the thought of such a future. I didn't want to destroy my family or hurt the people I loved most. And yet, my thoughts circled back to Grandpa, his frail frame and sorrowful eyes. His loneliness and yearning welled up inside me again, along with the guilt of refusing his final wish. I was caught in an unbearable tug-of-war between love and morality, between loyalty to my grandfather and the life I had built with my family. The battle raged on, relentless, as the nights stretched endlessly, leaving me trapped in the shadows of my own mind. The sleepless nights dragged on endlessly, each one a relentless battle within my mind. I felt as though I stood at a crossroads, paralyzed by indecision, unsure whether to turn left or right. On one side was the image of my grandfather, the man who had raised me like his own child, the man to whom I owed my entire life. His kind smile, his warm eyes, and his gentle guidance all played vividly in my thoughts. I remembered the days he walked me to school, the nights he sat by my side when I was sick, the words of encouragement he gave me during my darkest moments. He had given me a home, a family, and a life I had never dared to dream of. How could I possibly deny his final wish, knowing that he had devoted his entire life to me? But on the other path, Mark and Sophie's faces appeared just as vividly. Mark's cheerful expression, Sophie's innocent gaze, and the sound of her pure, joyful laughter filled my mind. I pictured our family evenings spent together, the carefree outings, the happy memories we had built over the years. Mark was a wonderful husband and an extraordinary father. He loved Sophie and me with all his heart. And Sophie, she was my everything, my light, my joy, my reason for living. How could I betray their love? How could I risk our family's happiness for a wish I wasn't even sure was right? Then there were the ethical boundaries, the societal norms I couldn't bring myself to cross. The thought of fulfilling my grandfather's request, the person I cherished most, filled me with dread and disgust. I was terrified of society's judgment, the whispers, the scornful glances. I feared people would see me as a monster, as someone twisted and immoral. Even more, I feared the consequences if this secret were to be exposed. It would destroy my family, break the hearts of the people I loved most, and shatter everything I held dear. I felt trapped between two worlds, between love and morality, between gratitude and guilt. I didn't know how to choose. I felt as though I were being torn apart, one half wanting to grant my grandfather's wish, the other desperate to protect my family and the values I held so tightly to. Conflicting thoughts tore at me endlessly, denying me even a moment of peace. I wondered if anyone else had ever been in a position like mine. Had anyone ever faced a decision as impossible as this? I felt alone, lost, as though the entire world was against me. Closing my eyes, I searched desperately for a way out. But all I could see was darkness, the darkness of confusion, of fear, and of despair. I didn't know what to do. I truly didn't know what to do. The sleepless nights bled into endless days of exhaustion. I was like a soulless shell, going through the motions of work and caring for my family, but my mind was consumed by my grandfather's plea. I tried to avoid him, to bury myself in distractions, but deep down, I knew I couldn't escape forever. One afternoon, the nurse called. My grandfather's health had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. I rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding. Seeing him lying on the hospital bed, struggling for every breath, broke me. His body was frail, reduced to little more than skin and bones. When he saw me, he managed a faint smile. "Ellie, you're here?" I took his thin, trembling hand in mine, his bony fingers gripping tightly. "Grandpa, don't speak. You need to rest." But he shook his head, his cloudy eyes locking onto mine with a pleading intensity. "No. I need to talk. I don't have much time left." His voice was weak, but filled with urgency as he began to speak. He recounted the beautiful memories he had shared with my grandmother, the deep love they had for one another. He spoke of the loneliness that consumed him after her passing, the unending ache of emptiness that had followed. "Ellie," he said, his voice trembling, "I know this is a difficult request, so very difficult. But you're the only family I have left, the only one I trust. I know you'll understand. I just want, one last time, to feel loved, before I leave this world." I was silent, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know how to respond. His words were like hammers, shattering my heart with each blow. He continued, his voice breaking, "You've cared for me so well. You've sacrificed so much for me. I'm so grateful to you. But if I leave with this regret, I'll never find peace." I looked at him, his sunken, weathered face, the tears trailing down his cheeks. His eyes revealed his pain, his despair, and his guilt. I felt as though my heart was being torn apart. His words cut deep into my mind, stirring an overwhelming storm of emotions, love, gratitude, guilt, and the unbearable weight of his plea. Each syllable seemed to echo endlessly, a legacy he was entrusting to me and a burden I could never escape. My chest felt heavy, as though a crushing force had taken hold of me. In his dimming eyes, I saw a yearning for peace, and that realization left me with no other choice. My logic, my morals, they all crumbled in the face of his desperation. In that moment, my reason gave way completely. My love for my grandfather triumphed. I broke down, defeated by his final request. Through my tears, I nodded. "Yes. Grandpa. I will. I will do it." The decision hit me like a thunderclap. I knew I had crossed a line from which there was no return. I knew I had done something wrong, something forbidden. But in that moment, all I could think about was my grandfather, his pain, his last wish. I hoped that by granting it, I could help him leave this world in peace. But I was wrong. This decision brought no peace to anyone. It ushered in endless days of torment, regret, and haunting memories that would follow me for the rest of my life. This choice was the breaking point of the story and the beginning of an inferno that consumed my soul. The following night, I drove to my grandfather's house in a daze. It was late, and the streets were deserted, bathed in the dim glow of streetlights casting shadows on the trees. I felt as though I was walking into a nightmare, a terrible dream I couldn't escape. When I entered the house, an eerie silence enveloped me. The faint glow of a bedside lamp spilled out from the living room, casting soft shadows. My grandfather lay on the bed, his eyes closed. His gaunt face was pale and fragile, more frail than I had ever seen. I approached the bed cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands trembled, and my entire body seemed to quiver with fear. I had never felt this terrified in my life. "Grandpa," I called softly. He opened his eyes and looked at me, a faint smile gracing his lips. "Ellie, you came. I nodded, unable to find words. I looked into his eyes and saw a mixture of hope, gratitude, and shame. I sat down beside him, taking his cold, thin hand in mine. His fingers gripped me tightly, their tremor mirroring my own. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by his labored breaths and the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Time seemed to stand still in that heavy, suffocating stillness. He looked at me, tears welling in his clouded eyes. "Thank you. Ellie, thank you." I couldn't hold back my tears. I leaned forward and embraced him. I felt his frailty, the fragility of life itself. I was overwhelmed with a profound sorrow and an aching tenderness for him. When I pulled back and looked into his eyes, I saw not just longing, but trust and surrender. He had placed all his faith in me, entrusted me with his final wish. In that moment, the turmoil within me seemed to dissipate. There was only one thought left in my mind: I had to do this for him. I had to give him peace. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I met his gaze and nodded slightly. "Yes, Grandpa. I'll do it." What followed unfolded in a surreal haze, as if reality and memory blurred together in an indistinct fog. I remember faint touches, the sound of soft sighs filling the space, and quiet tears slipping down our cheeks. Every motion carried a trembling uncertainty, every moment was veiled in confusion and anguish, and finally, a sense of resignation washed over me, a numb surrender. Just this once, and then it will all be over, nothing left to dwell on, I thought bitterly, as though trying to console myself. I closed my eyes and let go, surrendering to the tide of fate. There was no more resisting, no more searching for a way out. I let everything go, hoping that this act could somehow calm the storm raging within me. I won't describe in detail what happened that night. It will remain a secret between my grandfather and me, a scar etched deep into my soul, a scar I will carry for the rest of my life. The next morning, I woke to find him still asleep. His face looked more peaceful than I had ever seen it. Quietly, I got out of bed and took one last look at him. I knew that I had done something I never thought I could. I had done it out of love, out of gratitude, and out of the hope that he could leave this world in peace. But would his peace ever bring peace to my own heart? That was the question I knew I would grapple with for the rest of my days. A few weeks after that fateful night, my grandfather passed away. He took his final breath in my arms, his face radiating a serene calm I had never seen before. As I looked at him lying there, so still and peaceful as if he were merely sleeping, I was overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Grief, of course, was at the forefront, a profound sorrow for the loss of someone I loved so deeply. But alongside the grief was an unexpected sense of relief. Relief not just for him, but also, in some unspoken way, for myself. In the days immediately following his death, I was consumed by a relentless sense of torment. The memories of that night haunted me, refusing to let go. I recalled every detail, the gentle touches, the soft sighs, the tears we shared. I remembered the trembling of my hands, the haze of uncertainty, and the numbing surrender that had engulfed me. I found myself questioning everything. Had I done the right thing? Could love truly justify an action that defied every moral value I had been taught? I tried to bury those memories deep within, locking them away in the farthest corners of my mind. Around Mark and Sophie, I put on a facade of normalcy, determined to make them believe that I was fine, that there was no secret weighing on my soul. But every time I looked into Sophie's innocent eyes, filled with trust and purity, a fresh wave of guilt crashed over me. As time passed, the acute anguish began to subside. Slowly, I started to feel a sliver of relief. I convinced myself that I had done what was best for my grandfather, that he had left this world free of regret, at peace with himself. His calm, tranquil expression in his final moments seemed to validate that belief. I told myself that by fulfilling his final wish, I had helped him find peace. And perhaps, in doing so, I could also find peace within myself. I clung to that thought, trying to convince myself that the chapter had closed, that I could move forward with my life as if nothing had happened. But I was wrong. The peace I sought was an illusion, a fleeting mirage. The secret remained, embedded deep within my soul like a wound that refused to heal. It lingered, a constant reminder of that fateful night, of a decision that defied reason and morality, and of a secret I could never share with anyone. This shadow would follow me for the rest of my life, an unspoken truth that would resurface in quiet moments, reminding me of what I had done, what I had endured, and the cost of love and sacrifice. I had thought everything would end with my grandfather's death. I had deluded myself into believing that the serenity on his face in his final moments would ease everything, that I had done the right thing, that I had helped him leave this world unburdened. But I was wrong. Horribly wrong. Since the day he passed, I have lived in another world, a world consumed by shadows and guilt. The specter of that night haunts me, relentless and unforgiving. It lingers in every breath, every heartbeat, and every dream. My dreams have become true nightmares. I often find myself back in that room, reliving that moment, the trembling, the haze, the surrender. Then I wake up in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding uncontrollably. On some nights, in my panic, I unconsciously call out my grandfather's name. Mark, my husband, is worried about me. He holds me close, strokes my hair, and whispers soothing words. He thinks I'm grieving over the loss of my grandfather. He has no idea about the terrible truth that lies beneath my sorrow. Each time Mark embraces me or speaks words of love, a tidal wave of guilt crashes over me. I feel like I've betrayed him, betrayed his love, betrayed the happy family we built together. The thought of him discovering my secret terrifies me. I fear the disgust in his eyes, the contempt in his voice. I fear losing him, losing our family, losing everything. This fear follows me every moment of the day. Whenever I see Mark and Sophie playing happily together, a sharp pain pierces my heart. Pain for having betrayed them, pain for the unforgivable act I committed. Pain because I know that my relationship with my grandfather, no matter how much it stemmed from love, was, in the end, something repulsive, something unacceptable. I try to carry on as if everything is normal. I try to bury my true emotions and play the role of a happy wife and mother. But I know I'm living a lie, a carefully constructed performance. A play that I have no idea when, or if, it will ever end. I feel like I'm standing on thin ice. One wrong move, and my secret will surface, shattering everything in its wake. I live in constant fear, perpetual guilt, and unrelenting anxiety. I have no idea how to escape this spiral, no idea how to find peace again. All I know is that I've lost my sense of inner peace forever. And no matter how much I try to move forward, the weight of this secret will always anchor me in the past. The days and months that followed passed in a heavy, artificial haze. I did everything I could to return to normalcy, to be the wife and mother I had always been. I cooked dinners, took Sophie to school, and watched movies with Mark every Friday night. Outwardly, everything appeared peaceful and happy. But inside, an invisible distance was growing, a chasm I couldn't bridge. I was no longer the Ellie I used to be. A part of me had died that night. I felt as though I carried a dark secret, a burden so heavy that I couldn't share it with anyone. It was like an invisible wall separating me from Mark and Sophie. I still loved Mark deeply. I still adored Sophie with all my heart. But I couldn't look them in the eyes. Each time Mark hugged me, the guilt surged through me like a tidal wave. I feared he would sense the change in me, the coldness, the detachment that I could no longer conceal. I feared he would see through me, uncovering the terrible secret I was hiding. With Sophie, it was even worse. She was my everything, my joy, my purpose, my reason to keep going. But every time I looked into her innocent, pure eyes, I felt like the worst mother in the world. I had done something I never wanted her to know about. The thought of her discovering the truth and never forgiving me terrified me to my core. I tried to maintain the facade of happiness, to create a picture-perfect life for my family. But I knew I was acting, playing a role in a false reality where I could never truly be myself. The distance between me and my family grew wider, a deep, unending abyss I didn't know how to cross. I could feel the secret eating away at me, consuming me piece by piece. I knew that this secret, this burden, was changing me, and in turn, it was slowly changing my family. It was reshaping the bonds we once had, leaving behind a shadow of what we used to be. And I feared that it would haunt us forever. I tried, truly, desperately tried, to make everything normal again. I wanted to believe that time could heal all wounds, that I could bury this secret deep, deep within me. But I was wrong. The specter of that night lingered, a constant presence that denied me even a moment of peace. I avoided the truth and, in doing so, avoided Mark's love. Every time he embraced me, I no longer felt the warmth and safety I once cherished. Instead, I was consumed by crushing guilt and an ever-present fear. I was terrified he would notice the change in me, the coldness, the growing distance I couldn't conceal. I feared he would see through my facade, uncovering the terrible secret I was hiding. I kept telling myself I didn't deserve his love. I had betrayed him, betrayed his trust. I had done something so unforgivable that I couldn't even forgive myself. I avoided Sophie, too. I loved her with all my heart, but every time I looked into her innocent, pure eyes, I felt like the worst mother in the world. I had committed an act I never wanted her to know about. The thought of her discovering the truth and hating me for it terrified me beyond words. I lived in a constant state of mild panic. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing uncontrollably. A persistent unease followed me everywhere, a gnawing sense that something terrible was looming just out of sight. Mark noticed the change in me. His concern grew with each passing day. He asked me gently, trying to understand what was wrong. "Ellie, what's going on? You haven't been yourself since your grandfather passed. If something's wrong, you can tell me." His kind words only deepened my fear. I was terrified that if I told him the truth, our family would crumble. I feared Mark would never forgive me. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "I'm just still grieving for Grandpa." Mark pulled me into his arms, stroking my hair. "I understand. But don't try to shoulder everything on your own. If you need anything, just let me know." I stayed silent, burying my face in his chest, fighting back tears. I knew he loved me, I knew he was there for me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. This secret was my burden to bear alone. One day, Mark suggested I see a therapist. "I don't think you're okay, Ellie. You need to talk to someone, a professional." Panic flickered through me at his suggestion. I feared that a therapist might see through me, uncover the secret I had worked so hard to hide. But at the same time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps speaking to someone outside my world could help ease the weight crushing my heart. I agreed to see a therapist. But even as I sat across from them, I couldn't bring myself to reveal the truth. I spoke about the grief of losing a loved one, about the nightmares, about the anxiety and unease. I guarded my secret carefully, burying it deeper with every word, hoping it would stay hidden forever. Despite the sessions, the invisible wall between me and my family remained. The secret I carried was like a shadow that followed me everywhere, pulling me further from the life I was trying so hard to hold on to. 5 years have passed since my grandfather's death. 5 years of living in the shadow of a secret, of carrying the weight of pain and guilt alone. I have tried to live a normal life, to be a good wife and mother. But deep down, the wound remains unhealed, festering silently within me. I once believed that time would heal all wounds, that I could forget everything. But I was wrong. Time has not healed me, it has only deepened my pain. I live in constant fear that my secret will one day be exposed. I wrestle with guilt, questioning whether I even deserve forgiveness. The ache of not being able to share my burden with anyone haunts me. I want to scream, to let it all out, to unshackle myself from this heavy weight. But I can't. I can't tell Mark, the man I love, the man who has trusted me unconditionally. I can't tell Sophie, my little girl, whom I want to protect from all the world's darkness. I've been seeing a therapist, as Mark suggested. I've shared with them my nightmares, my anxiety, my grief over losing a loved one. But I still cannot bring myself to reveal the truth. It feels as though an invisible wall stands between me and my confession, a wall built from fear and guilt. The therapist encouraged me to find someone to confide in, someone who could help lighten my emotional burden. But I know there's no one who could truly understand, no one who could accept the horrifying truth I carry. One day, I found myself at a church. I sat alone on a cold stone bench, staring up at the statue of Jesus on the cross. I felt an overwhelming urge, a deep need to confess, to unburden my soul. I knelt before the altar, praying and weeping. I poured out everything to God, the pain, the guilt, the inner turmoil that had consumed me. I begged him for forgiveness, for the strength to carry this weight. After the prayer, I felt a slight relief, as if a part of my burden had been shared with him. But deep in my heart, I knew that confessing to God alone wasn't enough. I needed to face the truth, not just with him, but with myself and the world. After many sleepless nights of contemplation, I made a decision: I would write everything down. Every word would be an honest reflection of my soul, recounting the battles within me, the unending regret, and the small glimmers of hope I still clung to. I hope that by confronting my story, I can find peace for my spirit. More importantly, I hope my story might serve as a source of solace for someone else walking a similar path. If my words can help even one person feel less alone, then perhaps all the suffering I've endured will not have been in vain.